Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today for this third in a series of interviews with people around the world thinking innovatively about education, whether that's in the classroom like we do here at IESE, or in the workplace, or in the digital space. Today we're speaking with Annemie Ress, who's held senior positions in human resources in companies like eBay and Skype, some pretty exciting companies, and has founded PurpleBeach, which is a consulting firm that helps companies navigate change and foster innovation. So a basic setup for the conversation this evening is just to have a conversation together. We'll have some fun together and let Annemie share some of her experience working with companies on innovation. And time permitting, we'll take some questions at the end from the audience. Otherwise, we'll just continue with our conversation. So welcome, Annemie. It's great to have you. Maybe we can start with just a brief introduction. So give us a little bit more background about yourself, where you're coming from, and I guess specifically what you're doing today at PurpleBeach.
Great. So thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you guys, and hello from a very, very, very hot London. I think they said it's the hottest day in 176 years. So it's a historic day for us to have this conversation. So yes, my background is I'm South African. I trained as a lawyer, and over my career I have had a variety of opportunities to work in very, very diverse businesses. I started working within government, so for the new government in South Africa. I then proceeded to the private sector and moved to FMCG, where I worked for PepsiCo International. I spent some time in Switzerland working for the Swiss Institute of Comparative Law as a staff legal advisor to the Swiss Department of Justice and United Nations. I then ended up on a trading floor, oil trading floor, open outcry market, the last one in Europe in London, after which I joined eBay, then Skype and PayPal in its very, very early days. And I spent approximately 8.5 years with them in a variety of roles, always focusing either on the people and talent agenda, but always with an innovation focus. So my last role at eBay was Global Head of People Innovation, and we can talk a little bit more about that later if you have any questions, why people innovation. And then 5 years ago, I set up PurpleBeach, which is a people and innovation business that really works with businesses across multiple sectors, so insurance, financial services, but also startups. I can name a whole host of brand music and entertainment businesses. And the reason for the diverse client base is having come from working in a variety of Silicon Valley businesses for such a long period of time, I was always intrigued whether the solutions we found in the Silicon Valley space as they relate to people and innovation could also be applied in other sectors. Because when I left the eBay world, people said to me, no, those things only work in California. And what I very, very quickly learned is that there are actually a lot of commonality in terms of the challenges businesses face today, irrespective of sector, and obviously taking account of how businesses, their stage of growth and commercial challenges, but fundamentally the same approaches can apply because we all share very, very similar problems. So that's a little bit of in a nutshell, who I am and what I've done.
Okay, so clearly a very diverse experience, which I think gives you probably more interesting insights into a lot of the challenges that organizations are facing, given that you've seen so many different angles coming from geographic differences, industry differences.
Exactly.
But I guess you mentioned fundamentally there are some commonalities. So where do you see sort of some of these main pressure points coming that are common to most organizations? Is there something specific that you see as sort of being important across the spectrum?
Yeah, and I think none of them will be a surprise to you. I think we all know businesses, big and small, are struggling today with digital change and transformation. Although I also have a view that we need to move beyond that conversation towards talking about what is beyond digital, because digital is just becoming a way in which we need to do business. So digital clearly is a big bucket. For me, another big bucket is around business model innovation. So less so product innovation, but more so how do traditional businesses and even new startups create new business models. And I see a lot of these new business models anchored in platforms and platforms as such, as opposed to, hardware. So innovation is the second topic. And then the third one is, this is my hobby horse. I see businesses expecting of their people and leaders to be innovative. But if we look at how they treat, engage with people, they're not innovative with them. So the people they expect the innovation to make happen, the digital change to make happen, we still apply very traditional approaches and thinking and leadership mindsets and hierarchies and performance management systems to people. And that, I think, could be a barrier to some of the progress that we need to see. And I'd say there are two more topics. One is around decision-making. I think decision-making models have to significantly evolve in the future. And a lot of companies struggle with that. And then the last one, I would say, really is around mindset. So a lot of organizations talk about the need for culture change. I think culture change is very, very difficult to do. My experience, I've had loads of lessons, made loads of mistakes. I think that the easiest way, or a much quicker way, to fundamentally drive culture change is to focus on mindset. So what is the mindset that we need to recruit for, that we need to encourage, reward, recognize in our organization? And for me, mindset is a building block of culture. And so, in summary, it's digital, it's business model innovation, it's people innovation, it's decision making. And the last topic is mindset as opposed to culture.
Okay, so we see a lot of different issues that companies are facing, which sort of makes me concerned for the future in some ways.
No, I'm excited. Let me tell you why I'm excited about the future. Because I think and this comes to the mindset point, right? I think if you look and read a lot of articles in the media today, particularly, the news media, there are a lot of conversations around, the robots are coming, they're coming to take our jobs. And we were just talking before we started today. I think we have an opportunity to see the future as one of abundance and opportunity. And I think one of the key things we need to do is to redefine our human technology relationship. And that's in terms of saying, what are the opportunities we can create through technology? Potentially we can use artificial intelligence to free us up to really focus more on our happiness, psychological well-being, etc. So that's another topic we can talk about for hours. But I have a strong passion that the future is one of abundance.
And so you see, to some degree, though, the sort of so I see a similarity between your points on mindsets and then also the ways in which corporations are trying to implement these sort of innovative practices, right? So they seem to be, in some ways, one and the same. If the mindset of the culture is not in line with innovation, then the practices put in place from the point of view of HR or learning innovation in organizations will also sort of mimic that understanding. So do you have sort of any specific thinking on this issue? I mean, what kind of things can corporations do to sort of overcome this restriction?
Yeah. And so we've been, as me and the team have been doing a lot of work on what is called exponential organizations, and whether we call it that or whatever. But I think if you look at the businesses that have been able to successfully thrive in either making the digital change, in either unlocking new forms of business model innovation, there are 5 key shifts that these businesses are able to make. And so if I compare and contrast what we would call linear businesses to businesses who are actually able to successfully train, change and transform, exponentially grow, increase their impact 10x, the shifts are the following. And again, I'm not saying that linear organizations are bad and that these new organizations who were able, or the organizations who were able to make the change are good. I'm just saying that these are the differences, right? But I also think we can all play with them. So the 5 shifts are typically businesses who are able to shift mindset and unlock, particularly business model innovation, etc. Linear businesses typically are very hierarchical. The businesses who are able to really drive change sustainably, which is the operative word as well, as opposed to hierarchy, they embrace autonomy, crowds, communities, and networks. So practical example is they could involve their customers as part of a bigger crowd or community in the product development process. Or you could treat your employees as a network or also as a community with a lot of autonomy. You can use them, obviously, I'm sure many of you know, to solve and help you solve problems, find solutions. And so one of the teams I work with is a German innovation hub. It's a global innovation hub. And a very practical example is the hub is tiny. They have a huge business model innovation target. And very, very early on, they realized that they don't have the best and brightest ideas for business model innovation. But what they concretely did was to create a very strong network, crowds and communities around them of other academic institutions, of other startups, of other accelerators, of customers. And that's really where they source and develop their business model innovation ideas. So the first shift is hierarchies to crowds, communities, and networks. The second shift really is a linear business clearly is focused on financial performance, and financial performance is always important. The shift to businesses who drive the sustainable change really is that they focus on what is called a massive transformative purpose, data, and insight. And so what that means is, think of Google. Their MTP is organizing the world's information. Today, for millennials, they're looking for something bigger than themselves in the organizations that they join. So all of these types of businesses spend time on trying to really figure out why are they there, right? No matter what kind of business they are. I mean, we work with health and safety businesses who make elevators or sensors from fire. And that can be quite inspirational if you spend the time to figure out why are we here in a very inspiring way. And then what you do, as opposed to only focusing on financial performance, is you use your data and insights to very rapidly, day to day, week by week, month by month, check, calibrate, pivot, whether what you do is in service of your MTP. Next shift, probably not a surprise. It's away from sequential thinking. So I have to do step 1, then 2 and 3, or we have to do this before we can do that, towards experimentation and autonomy. So it's all around 70% is good enough. Get it out there, test and learn whilst we develop. The next shift is away from innovation focused on what didn't work in the past to innovation at the edges. So both at the edges of your business, but also looking for sources of innovative inspiration in sectors that have nothing to do with you. So again, the energy innovation hub that we work with, they look at the fashion industry. They look at the sports industry. They, for sources of inspiration and for collaboration and for new business models. And then the last shift is away from a closed leadership mindset to an open leadership mindset. And what that means is really in this type of environment, we have to rely on networks, a massive transformational purpose, experimentation, innovation at the edges. As a leader, you need to be comfortable, and you guys know this, with failing and also saying, I don't know what I don't know, but let's go and try and do an experiment, measure, and that's how we'll discover. And so that requires a very, very different leadership style.
Seems like it requires a lot of humility as well, right? Recognizing the limits to our knowledge, and also it seems to me that the sort of importance of data, right? So our really just the emphasis we need to make on utilizing the amount of quantitative data that's at our fingertips. But again, which is maybe not something that many managers have necessarily the sort of strong capabilities or capacities in.
True. Mm-hmm.
So do you see a shift in that respect? Are people are they feeling the pressure to develop these new skills to address these things? I mean, humility is one thing, but being able to take the next step and then develop these skills.
Yeah. I think it comes back to mindset. I think certainly the teams we work with actively work on, yes, cultivating that mindset, but also shifting their perspective on the talent they bring in, away from let's only look at skills and capability, but also let's make sure that we clearly articulate what are the mindset characteristics we want to bring into an organization, because this type of mindset shift should happen internally, and then be infused from the outside. So that is certainly what I'm observing. I think data is a challenging one. I mean, big data, it's such a buzzword. Actually, it's just data. And they're like, there's a lot of it out there. We know it's big. But, as I work with startups or even existing businesses, or if I think of my time at eBay years and years ago, we knew we had a lot of data, but we never really properly did anything with it. And that was before the days of big data. So I won't tell you how long ago that was. But what I see today is that a lot of businesses develop business models and they gather data. When they pitch to me as part of a team where we evaluate startups, they always say, and then we'll generate data and we're going to do stuff with it. And then we kind of go like, yeah, okay, but what's the stuff and how are you going to monetize?
Right.
And I think businesses are getting better in terms of understanding and valuing the importance of data. But I think where we still lack, and I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with the people who are making these comments, is I just don't think we've figured out exactly what the potential of all this data is, right? And what we could do with it. So that's how I'd answer that last question.
It's interesting because it's also sort of the academic conundrum, right? We have access to lots of data, but really where we should be starting is the hypothesis. What is it that we hope, what questions do we hope to answer? And then you go for the data. But it seems in business, there's so much data out there that you can get lost in sort of trying to understand what's really at stake. And when it comes to innovation, we know that it can be overwhelming to have so much data at our fingertips.
Yeah, and I think you put your finger right on it there, because what I always say to people when they come with ideas, and sometimes brilliant ideas, is exactly that, right? So less, the questions you want answered, but I always say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Because for a solution, for an invention to be meaningful, it needs to solve a problem, or it needs to solve a problem that you don't even know you have. iPad, for example, right? So I think it's really, really critical. The starting point should be, what's the problem we're trying to solve?
And we have evidently many problems to solve, right? This is, I think, the point. So maybe we can talk a bit about any sort of particular initiatives that you've seen in corporate learning, something that you think of, maybe examples or mini case studies that you've seen where you've seen really this innovation process touching on mindset, touching on sort of flattening the hierarchy. Can you maybe share an example or two about something that's really worked?
Yeah. So let me have a little think. I think an example of what I'm seeing, and certainly what we're pushing for across the board, is a move away from massive programs of transformation that are rolled out from the top towards bottom-up experimentation with what the change initiatives can be. Okay. So, for instance, we work with a big global bank in Spain that wanted to go through a digital change program. Instead of a top-down approach, we said, how about we introduce bottom-up experimentation that can drive insights that could really inform what the digital transformation journey needs to look like and what the problems are that need to be solved. So small teams who experiment, the insights from the experiments are then taken to start crafting the bigger plan or program. So that would be one example.
And sort of the top in the organization is comfortable with this notion. I could imagine some sort of trepidation about the possible ideas that might emanate from this.
Yeah, and that's where you need to encourage an open leadership mindset, embracing uncertainty. That's right. But I think they were open. I think if one can paint a picture of the potential that this can unlock, the levels of increased engagement this can drive, so people don't feel done to, they feel part of. Very few leaders, really, really push back. But I think you put your finger on something really important. What we've also seen is where we introduce this experimentation approach, you need that top level leadership support. Otherwise, there's total disconnect, and bottom up people start running experiments, but they run into blockers at mid-management level, and that's where you really need the senior level endorsement to open, the recognize great experiments, endorse, break down barriers, etc. So I think that really, really is critical. I think other examples that we've seen so experimentation, yes, and I can give you loads of examples. I think apart from two final points on experimentation, what we always say is, what's the problem you start trying to solve? And when we see experimentation fail is when the experiments are too big. So our view with experimentation always is, what's the smallest thing you can do that can have the biggest impact? And it can be a people or a commercial activity. And we use lean startup methodology. So have an idea, then a minimum viable product, run the minimum viable product, measure it, learn from it, and tweak it. So there is a methodology behind it. So that's one example. I think the other example is in the space of talent acquisition, where increasingly we're helping people, as I said to you earlier, really, really define what are the 5 mindset characteristics that you would need if you, for instance, want to drive innovation or digital change. And so a practical example would be when we built this innovation hub, we said that, yeah, we know we're going to get loads of bright, smart people who will apply, but we literally spend and still do the first couple of conversations around the mindset criteria. And so these are typically, no surprises, innovativeness, entrepreneurialism, because innovation without the ability to implement it is actually not that useful, courage, resilience, and clear, what we call business mindedness, which is different to entrepreneurialism, right? So that's more for us thinking of the bigger picture. What's the potential of this versus simply being really comfortable with an idea and running to pull it through. So, but even if I think that's not such a new idea, I think of my days at eBay, I think we were, I don't know, maybe 80 people in Europe, a tiny organization, maybe 1,000 people in the world. And what eBay really instilled in me was, in those early days, every single person that was hired, no matter what level you were in, I, for instance, had 12 interviews or conversations. Mm-hmm. Conversations weren't really about capability, and we didn't call it mindset at the time, but it was all about team fit, and different people had different of these elements to really calibrate on. So really exploring, what do you like outside work? What are your passions inside? What are your passions outside? And the other really important thing is, how do you fit with the team that you're going to work in? So we weren't as scientific about it then, but today, so go back to my earlier point around mindset, we also tend to hire teams, not people. So when we hire people, it's mindset, and then you look at how will they fit into an existing team.
That's right.
So that's another example. So
that's critical, right? I think that you hit an important point. I think that a lot of, at least from the scientific side of looking at this empirically, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that the team composition is more important than the individual, right? So we have to be very careful in hiring about the specific fit, not just with the manager, but also with teammates.
Yeah, totally. Because I think too often do we hire superstars, but we don't consider exactly, how will they contribute to making this team even more or better performing, higher performing?
That's right, and at every level, right? So I think Zappos is famous for many things, but one of the things they're famous for is specifically with respect to hiring, is that part of the hiring process was you were interviewed by the sort of secretary, right, or the administrative staff, right? So they have an input in terms of assessing your ability to work with this team, right? They're considered a team member. So
totally.
Really interesting, I think, innovative things happening in the recruitment selection stage of things. There were other things you wanted to say?
No, I'd love you to ask me another question, because otherwise I might ask you one.
I'd be more than happy to, but I think we're here for your expertise. Mm-hmm. So maybe, we've talked a bit about digital. I think we're all very familiar. I think the audience is certainly concerned with this sort of digital transformation, and I think we've touched on some of the important issues there. Maybe we can talk a bit about sort of diversity from a cultural standpoint. So I think one of the things we see a lot, and I think you look at any classroom at IESE, and it's extremely culturally diverse. How is this impacting sort of innovation? Are there barriers? Being familiar with the academic literature on this, it's very clear that there are a lot, there's a lot of potential when it comes to cultural diversity, but then in reality, that potential often isn't seen. So are you experiencing anything or seeing anything with respect to cultural diversity in innovation?
Yeah. So let me have a little think about that. So I think it is clearly important to have diverse teams. So both culturally, gender, et cetera, all of those. That's mere non-negotiable. I think some of the challenges I've seen is that unless you provide a frame and a container for how to value and contain, within which to contain diversity can either be ineffective or not be constructive. And so how I like to think of it, for instance, is currently we're working with a team, a tech business who is located in 5 different geographies plus 105 other locations, right? So across the globe plus 105 other locations. They value the cultural diversity they have, and that's really why they hire the best people where they can find them. It has, however, created challenges because, for obvious reasons, cultural, language, time, communication, add this layer of Skype to, digital communication, to all those challenges to getting to know each other and really integrating properly. And I think, so this is the second time I did this at Skype when I was there, but what we've done for this team is to say, actually, be who you are, contribute and be who you are. We really value the diversity, always express it. But what we'd like you to hold on to is, within our work context, let's put the mindset that you always need to have is the company first. And I'm not being old-fashioned now. I'm just saying I can't say the company's name. But let me give you my eBay example. For instance, we even did this at eBay, where it was much less diverse at the time. But if you have to make a decision as to whether your idea or my idea is better, and we might be at loggerheads, what we need to be able to do, because we come from diverse backgrounds, what we need to do is to take a step back. And the one thing we have in common, or could have in common, is that we work for a company that we care about. And if we care for that company, what we should do is take a step back and say, objectively, irrespective of you or me, let's try and have a conversation around what is best for the business that we're working for. And then let's collectively take the best decision for the business, valuing our diversity, which contributed to that decision. But it might be that sometimes it's your decision, sometimes it's mine, and sometimes it's a combination of both ours or none. And so I think I'm a really strong believer in frameworks. I'm a strong believer in autonomy, but I think it's also helpful that when you have autonomy to frame the boundaries, the lack of boundaries that might exist, because I think that's how we truly leverage diversity and truly at least give people a steer, fairly, within the context of autonomy, and how to really get the best from diverse backgrounds, conversations, and experiences.
Right, so it seems like the key is to focus on sort of like the greater good, right, or sort of the long-term picture of what's happening rather than the short-term, like maybe political ramifications of one's decisions, which I think many companies struggle to do, but certainly a great end.
Yeah, and it's not easy. It's not easy, right? I might have made it sound easy, but it's really not easy.
But I think it speaks a little bit to this mindset, right? So what is your mindset working in an organization, and how, what's your long-term career look like? Is it something you're in it for yourself, or is it something where you feel like you can have a legacy where you have an impact on others? And if you can focus on that, leveraging diversity is probably much easier, right? Because the notion is you should come to the best possible decision.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, which is I think, as with these terms like digital and innovation and diversity, I think it's really important that every single business figures out what is their definition of digital, what is their definition of innovation, and what is their definition of the diversity that needs to work for them. Because otherwise, I think it becomes a term, but I think it's really helpful to spend some time to say, in our organization, this is what we value from a diversity perspective. We embrace it more broadly, but this is what it means. Or in our organization, this is what our definition of digital is. We're not Google, we're us. And so I think a lot of businesses don't even spend the time on that, which I think is also really important, because then they make it their own.
That's right. So you can't just go and take someone else's definition. You really have to make it something specific to the needs.
Yeah, correct.
So we're sort of running a little bit out of time, but you had mentioned something about, I think, people innovation. Was there something specific you wanted to talk about in that area? So I was curious what that means. I can sort of envision a few things, but.
Yes, I know. I've written an article, so forgive me, called HR Has Been Left for Dead Amongst the Ruins of Business Chaos. And yeah, it was at the time of the economic decline we suffered more broadly. But I think it goes back to that point I made earlier, which is that unless we challenge ourselves, if you are an HR practitioner, to also be innovative and not think that innovation or digital change is something that happens out there, but every time you engage with an employee, you actually say, is this an opportunity for me also to innovate around people, right? And so it doesn't have to be anything big. There are 3 horizons of innovation, if you're familiar with them. Horizon 1 is process tweaks. Horizon 2 is where you look a little further than process and stop playing with the new ideas. And Horizon 3 is disruptive innovation. So you don't always have to be disruptive. Right. But I think, number one, we need to challenge ourselves to become people innovators. And And certainly in terms of my experience, what I've seen is when you do that, you have huge opportunities to drive engagement in many, and attract talent in a very, very different way in an organization. I always think there's a place for the basics, the administrative, etc. basics, but I think sometimes we're a bit lazy because it seems as if the solutions from the past could just be rolled out in the future. And if you think if you look at the employee base and population today, they're so diverse, they have such different expectations, and even to the extent, and complex, right? So baby boomers can behave like millennials. And so we really need a very, very different, much more open-minded way to also engage with people.
Right, so it seems like if you want innovation in the organization, it's, it can be bottom up, but the mindset and the sort of, the start
Exactly.
is really within HR, right? The corporate learning initiatives have to have that same ethos and that same mentality of going out and being innovative themselves. But it seems to me, I mean, having recently been to a couple HR conferences, there's lots of innovation happening in HR. I mean, it's such a rich time, for new processes, again, specifically in digital, but harnessing data. I mean, there's so much happening with respect to new ways of doing everything from recruitment selection to learning and development. I mean, it's actually a really fascinating time in my mind within HR, right? Because I think there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I think we just need to be courageous and embrace it.
Yeah. So it could be a scary frontier, but I think there's a lot of potential. So maybe we take one question from the audience, because I'm looking at my screen here, and I see there's a couple of questions that actually seem to touch on a similar issue, which is thinking a bit about innovation, specifically in like a fast-paced workplace, right? So under time pressure, when you have to make quick decisions, is there something specific about innovation in these types of environments? Maybe some specific practices or examples you see? I mean, I think we can say that all workplaces today are faster than they've been in the past, but some perhaps have more pressure than others.
Yeah, and I think so. I think a couple of things. Again, it goes back to mindset. So you either have a limiting or liberating view of the fast pace and the pressure that you might be under, right? So you can either see that as a hindrance or an opportunity. I've seen the biggest and greatest innovations happen when people are slightly under pressure and have to deliver. So I'm not saying that's good to do on a sustainable basis, but I'm just saying it's not always bad to have a little bit of pressure on you, because normally the first idea that you have, if you spend a couple of minutes, it could be the greatest one. That's the first point. Second point is, if you are in such an environment, don't try and create a piece of innovation that is outside of your day-to-day. I would always start with saying, what is the smallest thing I can do that can have the biggest impact to drive change or innovation as it relates to what I'm doing day-to-day, whether it's stakeholders, customers, or people that I lead or work with. I'd say that's the second thing. So really small baby steps, not big, integrated into your work. And then really embrace this lean startup methodology, which works for products, business model, but totally for people as well, which is have an idea, test the assumption, take the data, change your idea, and go again. So, I definitely think it's doable. Key piece, though, don't go too big and don't do something that's totally out of scope and says, I have to make the whole business innovative. Right. That's a good starting point, yeah.
And the danger there of changing too many pieces at once is you don't actually know which piece is the one driving the success, right?
Exactly.
Well, I can say I'm trained as an experimental social psychologist, and I can say that it's great to hear this happening in business, right? This idea of experimentation, controlled experiment. So it's exciting to hear this sort of being an important part of innovation, because I think we've been trained to really take that as an essential element of trying to understand how to make change in organizations. So it's great to hear.
Good.
Well, Annemie, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a really great conversation. I hope the audience has gotten some great insights from your experience. Again, thank you very much.
Okay.
And to the audience, sorry, go ahead.
Take care.
All right, thank you. To the audience, our next session, I believe, is on July 6th. So it'll be a pleasure to have you join us again for that next session. And again, Annemie, thank you again for your participation. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.